It was a warm evening in Al-Madinah during the holy month of Ramadan. The streets were decorated with colorful lights, and the sound of the adhan calls Muslims to break their fast. But, as a 21-year-old engineering student, life wasn't exciting as it used to be. He couldn't understand why he felt so empty inside. Outside, people were heading to the mosque for Taraweeh prayers, but Ahmad didn't feel the motivation to join them. He wondered,
Is this all there is to life?
one evening, after a particularly empty-feeling day, Ahmed decided to visit Sheikh Hassan. His grandfather, who after the death of his father taught him the beauty of Iman, the wisdom of the Quran, dealing with women, and consoled him in times of doubt, has reached the frail age of 90. His time in this world drawing to a close. If anyone could help Ahmed understand his feelings, it would be him. After a 2-hour drive, Ahmed arrived at his grandfather's modest home. Sheikh Hassan was sitting in his garden, misbah in hand. Despite being 85 years old, there was a youthful sparkle in his eyes that Ahmed had always admired.
Assalamu alaikum, Jaddi.
Ahmed greeted.
Wa alaykum as-salam, my son.
Sheikh Hassan replied, gesturing for Ahmed to sit beside him.
What brings you here in the middle of the week?
Ahmed hesitated before speaking.
Jaddi, I need to ask you something. What does it mean to make the most of your life? I feel like my life is dull and empty. If I'm already feeling this way at 21, how have you kept your joy towards life until now?
Sheikh Hassan studied his grandson's face.
I can see it in your eyes. You don't have it yet.
Don't have what, Jaddi?
The eyes that can truly see life. Perhaps the best way to explain is to tell you about my own journey.
Ahmed settled in, eager to hear his grandfather's story.
When I was your age, I too felt that life was dull. Everything around me, the desert, the buildings, the people, they all seemed gray and boring. I prayed 5 times a day because I had to, not because I wanted to. I went to school, but didn't care about learning. I had acquaintances, but no real friends. I thought, is this all there is to life? Just going through the motions until we die? I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't realize how wrong until I was 25. I got my first real job at the oil company and married your grandmother shortly after. We were deeply in love. Life seemed good for a while, but then everything fell apart in a single day. I made a terrible mistake at work that cost the company a lot of money, and I was fired on the spot. Humiliated and worried about how I would provide for my new wife, I rushed home earlier than usual, seeking comfort. But when I walked in, the house was quiet. I found a note from your grandmother saying she had gone to visit her sick mother in the neighboring village. That same evening, I received word that there had been an accident. The bus she was traveling in had crashed. Your grandmother survived, but with injuries that would affect her health for years to come. In just one day, I had lost my job and a future that suddenly looked bleak and uncertain. That night, after returning from the hospital, I sat alone on the roof of our small house, feeling completely broken. I looked up at the dark sky and asked, why Allah? Why this test? Why now? It was then that I remembered the words of the Prophet as taught to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh. Know that if the entire nation were to gather to benefit you with something, they would not benefit you except with what Allah has already written for you. And if they gathered to harm you with something, they would not harm you except with what Allah has already written against you. The pens have been lifted and the pages have dried. Jami at-Tirmidhi. In that moment, under the vast night sky filled with countless stars that Allah had placed there, something shifted inside me. I remembered the verse from the Quran. Perhaps you hate a thing, and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing, and it is bad for you, and Allah knows while you know not. For the first time, I truly understood that my plans were nothing compared to the divine plan. The depression and meaninglessness suddenly evaporated. I realized that I had been living as if this temporary world was all that mattered. I began to pray not because I had to, but because I needed to connect with Allah. Life didn't suddenly become easy. I worked many odd jobs, a street vendor, a mosque cleaner, a shepherd for a wealthy man's flock. But every experience, whether difficult or easy, became meaningful because I finally understood that this life is merely a passing moment compared to the eternal life that awaits us. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Be in this world as if you were a stranger or a traveler along a path." When I lost your grandmother years later, I grieved deeply. But even in my grief, I found strength because I knew that our separation was temporary in the grand scheme of Allah's plan. The point, my dear grandson, is that life becomes dull when we attach too much importance to this temporary world. Our task is not to question the plan, but to trust in the wisdom of the planner, to do our best and then surrender the outcome to Him. Remember, my son, this world is fleeting. Your true destination is the afterlife.
Ahmed remained silent, his head now bowed in thought.
Come now, my boy. This isn't meant to make you sad. It's meant to awaken you. Your parents want you to be safe. They want you to get a good job, marry a good woman, and live a comfortable life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But don't forget to truly live while you're doing those things. Take risks for the sake of Allah. Fall in love with His creation. Feel everything deeply: happiness, sadness, fear, hope. Travel and see the world He made. Help others without expecting anything in return. Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Most importantly, never forget the miracle that is taking place every moment you're alive. Every breath is a gift. Every sunset, every rainfall, every smile from a child. These are ayat from Allah, if only we have the eyes to see them.
Without saying a word, Ahmed stood up and embraced his grandfather tightly, tears forming in his eyes. Over the next several weeks, Ahmed began to change. He spent less time on his phone and more time noticing the world around him. He began to see beauty in simple things: the pattern of light through his window, the sound of children laughing in the park. 1 month after his visit, Ahmed received a call. His grandfather had peacefully passed away in his sleep. As he hung up the phone, Ahmed sat on his sajada and looked up. Tears poured from his eyes, creating small dark spots on the fabric. But through his tears, he smiled and whispered,
Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This is what it truly means to experience life as a Muslim.
In that moment of grief and acceptance, Ahmed realized that this too was part of the full experience of life that his grandfather had spoken about. He wiped his tears and said to himself,
This is what it truly means to experience life as a Muslim.
And from that day forward, Ahmed's life was never dull or empty again.